joining us today. Just as a reference, this is revolutionizing the contact center using existing analytics to improve your workforce. And before we jump into the agenda and the panel, I did want to do one bit of housekeeping. So Mary Murcott, who's not only the CEO of NOVO One Contact Centers, but also a published author. And so we have two books, Driving Sales, Peak Sales Performance in Call Centers. And we're actually going to be raffling this off. I'm sorry, not raffling. We're going to be passing around a hat, and everyone can submit their business card, and then we'll be picking a couple at the end to see who can get the copies. And it's actually very relevant for our session today because at least a third of the book is on pre-hire selection and workforce profitability. So, great. So before I introduce or allow our panelists to introduce themselves, oops, sorry, don't get the session. Let me just give a little bit of a description of the session, the agenda, and the objectives. So just in terms of what we want to cover, I'm going to start by giving a little bit of background about how predictive analytics and big data, well, what they are to begin, and then how they've revolutionized other industries. And then we're going to move forward. We're going to talk about how they are currently revolutionizing the call center industry. Now we have a few objectives for the session. We want to make sure that everyone leaves here understanding how they can go about applying predictive models and analytics to their own data. So we want this in some ways to be kind of a how-to, and everyone should really have a good sense of what their next steps are to be thinking about analytics and data and how they can be looking at employee tenure, attrition, performance, how we can be improving those things. But in order to do that, we're actually going to be offering a couple case studies of a couple companies that we have worked with to understand what drives attrition and performance. And so there's some interesting results that we've generated in the course of doing research with our partners. So in terms of the agenda, first I'll let everyone introduce themselves. Second, we're going to talk about the big data revolution. So everyone hears about this big data analytics, and it's hard to understand exactly why it's occurring and what it is. So we're going to give a little bit of background, and then we're going to offer up a few very concrete examples as to how this has been applied within the contact center space. And again, a few research studies that we've done that show exactly what does drive attrition and performance within everyone's centers. And then finally, some how-to-do-it-yourself tips. So I'll start by just giving a few overarching principles, but Dan, Mary, and Jeff are all going to chime in and give all of you a sense of what to be on the lookout for, pitfalls and perils, and things that can generally allow you to sort of facilitate this process. So before I go on, I'll let everyone introduce themselves. If you want to go ahead, Dan.
Sure. My name is Daniel Dougherty. I'm with a company called ResultsTel. We're a small to growing to medium-sized outsourcer with about 12 shops in Mexico, the Philippines, and the domestic United States. We've had our partnership with Evolv for coming up about 1 year, 9 months. I'm responsible for training, quality, continuous improvement, and business intelligence at Results.
And hi, I'm Mary Murcott, and I'm the CEO and president of NOVO One. We're very much like the Results company. I think we have similar philosophies. We're an outsourcer. The only difference is we really don't believe in offshore. For most companies, we're completely onshore. We think it's better customer service and experience, although there are some exceptions to that rule, and I will admit there are some very good offshore. We have about 2,500 people in 5 centers. One of them located, the biggest one, 1,200 people located in DFW airport area. And so we're real big fans. We've been with them about 1 year and 9 months as well.
My name is Jeff Camp. I work with TXU Energy, which we're the largest retail electric provider here in Texas. How many folks in the room are from Texas? Okay, so a lot of you probably know us. If you're not from Texas, you may not understand the way this market works. This is a competitive retail market, so there are 45 different companies you can buy your electric service from. And when you think about what we sell, it's effectively the same thing. It's a commodity. So we are one of the big players in the market, but we have to differentiate the way we approach customers because we have to win on the basis of our products, our plans, our innovation, and most importantly, our people. We've been an Evolv client indirectly. We have a captive call center here in Dallas. We also have 8 outsourced partner centers that we operate, and we're using Evolv in 2 of our centers and are comparing that result that we're getting with Evolv to some of our other hiring practices, and I've seen some fabulous results.
Great, and my name is Mike Housman. I'm the moderator. I'm actually an economist by training, so I have a PhD in economics and have a background in employee engagement as well as predictive analytics. So just to start, again, I want to set the stage a little bit, and let's give a little bit of background about this big data revolution. Everyone's hearing about this. There are regularly articles appearing that talk about big data, predictive analytics. So why is this occurring? And just to give a brief history of big data and predictive analytics, what we found, up through the mid-90s, computers, essentially there were rate limiting factors, and what those were originally were the size of the computers and the cost. And so throughout those 90s, what we saw was that computers got smaller, they got cheaper, we were able to put a PC in everyone's home. Now, the following 10 years, there was a maturity of the internet, and that's applicable to call centers in that we saw certain technologies beginning to enter the call center space. So call routing, switched from manual to automatic. We saw CRM software as well as computer telephony integration. So a lot of software was making its way into the call center throughout that time period. Now, what we've seen in other industries within the, say, last 10 years is that big data is becoming the kind of buzzword, and that's partially because memory and computer capacity is increasing, and computer processing speed is also increasing. So previously, there wasn't as much data being produced because there wasn't as much memory to hold it, and it just wasn't being produced with the same velocity that it is now. I actually read a soundbite recently that said the first 10 years of the internet, the amount of data that was produced during that time span is now produced within 4 days. So again, we're now getting our hands on lots and lots of data, and the rate limiting factor currently is being able to manipulate, process, clean it, and generate insight from it. And so that's why we've landed here. All of you in your contact centers are generating large amounts of data through your HRMS, performance management systems. You're generating data on your customers and clients, their speech analytics. And what we often hear from clients and just people we're talking to in the industry is, what do we do with all this data? We're drowning in data, and we need to be able to make sense of it and use it to drive improvement to our bottom line. So outside the contact center space, there are a number of companies that really haven't even just benefited from this data revolution. They've really made it their core value proposition. At the top, Google and Oracle are essentially big data companies. And a lot of this revolution started with a couple white papers that were issued by Google in which they theorized that we could take data processing that was previously occurring in large mainframe computers, and we could do it in parallel. So we could set up hundreds or thousands of computers to parse the data, to analyze it, and then pull the results back together into one space. And that's really revolutionized this space. And so as a result of those white papers, open source software kind of took over and ran with it. And this is where we find ourselves now, in a place where we have millions and millions of records that we have our hands on, and we need to find a way to analyze it. But the key piece here is that this is driving differentiation, that there are a large number of companies increasingly in the call center space that are using big data and analytics to drive the value that they offer their end customers. So the implication is that we're gathering all of this data on our clients, on our customers, on our employees, and we need to be able to analyze it and try to understand what it's telling us. So we're going to offer a few examples that show how we've used those big data and analytic techniques in order to understand what makes agents more productive, what keeps them in the job longer, and what allows them to be more engaged, what creates a better customer experience because they're talking to agents that are really engaged in their role and are doing everything they can to help out. So as I mentioned, just a brief set of background, and I really want to make sure that we're able to take questions from the panelists. So I'm going to offer a few case studies up, and so I think what we're going to do is actually start with Dan, and he can talk a little bit about the background for the results companies.
Sure, thanks, Mike. So we're, as a growing outsourcer, what we've noticed is we move from a lot of decentralization in our processes to centralizing many things, one of them being training and quality, and moving those into one group centralized. When we did this, you know, I've done this design a couple times at a couple other places, as I'm sure many of you have. We wanted to use a little bit more of a data approach in what we were doing. What makes a trainer successful? What is the handoff process and the toll gates before you get somebody into training and after training? So really this part of the case study, we've done a lot more with analytics, and you'll see a couple more examples with Evolv, but we want to focus in on that. So we knew we needed standard operating procedures for our training department. We knew we wanted to focus on the handoff process. We wanted to focus on classroom structure, how we were evaluating and coaching trainers, and understand early tenure attrition. Attrition's a big issue for everybody in this room, I'm sure, especially as an outsourcer. And we were focused, when we looked at our data, at our early tenure attrition, because that was where the lowest hanging fruit was. Beyond that, how do we set up a meaningful rewards and recognition system? And then understanding what would be most impactful for our train the trainer program. So not just what do I think as a training leader, or what does our ASTD, you know, training director think, but what's actually driving the numbers. So we wanted to partner deep with Evolv from an analytical perspective. We have our own analytics team, but you know, we don't have several PhDs on it, et cetera. So it was an opportunity for us to partner and get deeper analysis that we could then use that insight to drive to action. I think that's the most important part of what we did here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So what we formed was a research partnership, and we wanted to dig in and we wanted to understand training within the results companies. And they were already providing us data feeds from their HRMS system. So we were getting agent level records that indicated when someone was hired and when they were separated. But what was also in this field, and this at least started as somewhat a serendipitous circumstance, because we were getting the trainer IDs almost inadvertently. And sitting down and looking at this data, we kind of realized this is really neat stuff. Let's look at survival by trainer, like we would by location, by program, so on and so forth. So what we did was we used various models. We took this large data set with 22,000 agents, 68 trainers, 17 locations, and we actually had two companies that we worked with, another company that was providing those trainer IDs. And we used survival curves and Cox proportional hazard models. And actually, the survival curves were where we saw the most robust results. So what you're looking at here are curves that are generated for two specific locations. On the x-axis are days of tenure, and on the y-axis is the probability of survival. So it's the percentage of agents that you have at each point in time. So it starts off at 100% for all of those curves, and then over time, unfortunately, we lose agents. But what's really interesting here is you'll notice each of those lines represents a different trainer. And what we saw was a lot of variance. What you can see here is very apparent. There are some trainers that are very good at keeping people during the training process, but even beyond, preparing them so much so that they're able to handle the job and they really ramp up really quickly and hit their stride. And then on the other hand, there are unfortunately some trainers that have struggled, who are preparing agents in a sort of less robust manner, and as a result, the agents are dropping off during training, and they're being lost once they've hit the floor. So again, we applied some more complex techniques. I mentioned the Cox models, and all those really do, they're regressions, and they control for everything else. So when we look at these results that we're about to show you, we're able to say holding location, program, a general proxy for applicant quality. Let's hold all of that constant, and let's just look at the differences between the trainers. And what we found was that the best trainers yielded agents with 2 to 3 times higher survival than the agents that were less proficient, that's a large amount of variance. We don't see that sort of variance across almost any other factor. Second, we found that when we tried to explain the causes of attrition, trainers were responsible for at least 25% of it. Third, and this is a credit to Dan, they were already in the process of doing classroom observations of their trainers, and this was completely independent of our project. They just wanted to understand what makes someone a good or a bad trainer. And so they had individuals going through and evaluating the trainers on a number of characteristics. And what we then realized is we could marry that up with the data we were already using, by the trainer ID codes, and we could actually throw that into our models and say, what are the characteristics that keep people around, and what are the characteristics that tend to lose people? And so the things that we found positively impact survival were trainers that were more stimulating. They engaged in knowledge checks, they asked questions, they promoted discussion within the classroom, and in general, they were more engaging. What negatively impacted survival were trainers that really stuck to the curriculum, and so they were stricter, they were a bit more organized, somewhat higher energy levels, but we thought that was interesting, that they actually just stuck to the curricula they were given, and they didn't allow for any opportunity for question and answer, that give and take that is really key in a classroom environment. So beyond this is a somewhat separate study, but Results wanted to understand the impact of previous work experience. So is job relevant work experience a good predictor of attrition? And they were asking applicants whether they'd worked in a contact center before. And so realizing that and knowing that we already had the HRMS feeds in place, we wanted to answer another research question, which is what is the impact of previous experience on that future outcome? And most would intuitively think if you've been in a contact center before, you probably know what's involved. And so as a result, you're probably a better fit if you end up getting this job. But we found some really interesting results. So Dan and I, we found that in the Philippines, previous experience wasn't predicting those future outcomes, that whether or not people had been in a contact center before wasn't really a predictor of how long they would end up staying at this next job. However, in the United States, we actually found that there was some differentiation, and that was driven largely by one or two sites where there were very strong effects. So in certain circumstances, it made more sense to hire people that had been in a contact center before, and what they were able to do is sort of modify hiring algorithms to accommodate this information and make more data-driven decisions. And actually, I should stop there and just let Dan elaborate a little bit more on what they were able to do with this information.
Yeah, I'd say there's two probably big things. I'll go back to the training piece first. One thing we were able to do is develop a quadrant type system, right? And build 4 arch types of trainers. We kind of had the class clown, we had the drill sergeant, those are kind of the extremes on one side or the other. Then we had the rock star trainer, and then, we had kind of the ineffective trainer, I think is what we called that quadrant for people that were low in both. And we looked at attrition in class and outside of class, and then we looked at, and basically, just to give you a little bit of background, the way we did this, we have remote monitoring technology using cameras in all of our classrooms. We built some simple web forms like you would for quality monitoring, and we used a lot of objectives, and then we calibrated a team of basically training directors who have 20 plus years experience in the space to really look and watch those classes and what they thought would do it. I think we had 50 some elements within that form. Stimulating and dull, maybe we're on one side of each spectrum, and engaging, and then the counterpart for that. And then what this was cool, and I think it's the Cox model, which I'd never heard of before, but they give you all these cool names like bootstrapping model for Monte Carlo and whatever. But at the end of the day, what they were able to do is take all those inputs and say, okay, you guys thought 50 things were important. These 5 are really the predictors. And you guys are in love because you're all energetic training type people. You're in love with these energetic trainers, but actually there are people who are sticking in training and they're quitting as soon as they hit nesting, OJT, or grad school. So let's delve further into that. So we were able to tune how we deal with our observations, what training we deliver to our trainers, and what our training directors felt like were important from a career pathing perspective for trainers coming up in the business, and then also trainers moving to senior training positions. So that was really cool to learn that from the data we already had, just by leveraging the partnership for what we already were doing. 2 other things in training, I'd say, we use this Evolv scoring to not, it's not like, it could almost be a stigmata in a lot of ways. You get a red, green, or yellow, and it's a couple different competencies, sales or efficiency or customer care. We try and look past that and say that's just one data point, but the way we will use that data point is that if I have a class and I'm a trainer, I get all greens coming in, right? I'm in pretty good shape. If I have all reds, maybe I'm raising my hand and asking for additional trainer to be in the class, or I'm adjusting ratios, or it's how I structure the in-class activities, things like that. So just even the raw data without the analysis behind it is very, very helpful and made us much smarter. As far as what we've done with that, when we built those SOPs, we were able to identify those toll gates better, what elements should be in the toll gates, and what we really should be looking at. So what we thought was important when we sat around the conference room table, what really was important in the data, drove these results. So, Evolv was our implementation this year. We built a graduate school program, which is a fancy term for nesting, We also uptrained our trainers and built certifications for them. So we drove a lot of early tenure attrition improvements in these 2 years. And you can see that, right? 9 points within 30 days, 16 points in 3 months, and 13 points in 9-month points. It really was a holistic approach, but I will say that having that data from the assessment and Evolv and the way we approach the partnership and link the two analytics teams is what made that possible. And that's huge for us. That helped us maintain and grow our business organically to where it needed to be. So, I think we went from $20 million 4 or 5 years ago, like when we started this, we started the relationship, probably we're at about 60 million, and we were able to keep enough of the people around and grow organically, so now we're pushing about 100 million. So, it's been very, very beneficial. It goes right to the bottom line, the right-hand box there in the bottom of the sheet, and it makes a ton of sense for us.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I would actually just add that I don't like the term client vendor. I think how we envision these relationships is more as an engagement. And this is, in my mind, a research partnership in that we're able to work together. And so Dan's team is outstanding at getting us data. And we were actually just having a conversation yesterday where we said, look, how can we share data? This is what we'd like from you. This is what we can provide. But at the end of the day, the goal is the same, is to improve attrition, to increase performance. We want to get the best possible agents in those seats, and we want to develop them well and make sure that we're taking care of the customer. So I think that's one of the key pieces to sort of bear in mind, is that these are engagements. You need to be willing to share data in order to achieve that sort of improvement. Great. So with that, I'll actually hand it off to Mary, and she can kind of set the stage for some of the research that we did with NOVO.
So I had, as my book, and if you could, the gentleman in front in the blue here, if you could take that little milk drop, put your card in and put it around, you'll be in a drawing for the book. So that's it. That's the hat. Oh, you did? If you could start to pass it, that would be great. So that's the only business card. You get 2 books. All right. It's a good one. Well, I'd researched truly for about 10 years predictive hiring assessments, and, they've been in and out of vogue for the last 50 years. I mean, they started with AT&T and Xerox many years ago, 50 years ago, and there's a Hunter & Hunter meta-analysis. Notice how I said meta-analysis? You like that? He's a PhD. So meta-analysis. That means basically they've normalized the data from 50 studies to normalize it, and basically said, hey, 50% to 80% of people are in the wrong job. Who believes that? Raise the hands. 50 to 80% in the wrong job. But if you could get them in the right job, and you could get them on the right bus in the right position, so the bus is get them in the right company with similar values and an interesting job, and then get them in the right position on the bus, meaning they're in service versus sales versus management, then you've got a shot at great customer service, great customer experience, great sales, right? And so we knew this to be true, and so we were in the hunt, and decided to do it right. And one of the things we really liked about this particular product is closed loop systems. So, this is the only system I found that actually was able to take the data and close the loop and say, where did we hire those great people? And start tweaking the questions to how did great people who performed great on the job, lower attrition, better attendance, better adherence to schedule, better service, better sales, better first contact resolution. How did they answer these questions, and where did we get them from? That was the thing for me. I knew I was spending tons of money recruiting, and it's a spiral door coming through. And so we did it for 2 reasons. We did it to add more value to our clients, the people that entrusted their customers with us. So better first contact resolution, better experience, better loyalty, and better sales. But also equally, and quite frankly, bring more to my bottom line, as you said, hits the margin line right there. Attrition is worth a lot to me if I can reduce it. And then also it has to do with knowing people when I come to work, that it's not a revolving door, that I care about them, and that they're there, and they're there by choice. So that's sort of why we went into this.
Great. Excellent. And so it was a similar study we engaged in with NOVO, which was we wanted to understand the impact of supervisors, and then separately transfers, rehires. There were other elements in their data feed. So in this case, we had a large sample. This was several years of hiring events. It was almost 5,000 agents, over 230 supervisors across 4 different locations, and a number of different programs. And what NOVO One was able to deliver, which is actually very impressive, was a HR transition file. And so that not only identifies an agent supervisor, but more critically, that actually identified when super agents were transferred across supervisors or locations or programs. And that was key because then that allowed us to think, well, transfers are a good indication of whether there's a good or a bad fit there, and is it possible that transfers have an impact on keeping agents longer? And likewise, we actually found that there were a large number of agents that had been rehired, and so we were able to dig into that and try to give a little bit of insight into whether those rehired agents stayed longer because they knew about the rigors of the job, or whether they tended to drop off more quickly.
Can I just make a point? Before we even went into this, before we even had a predictive hiring system, and this is something you can go do tomorrow, even if you don't have one, and we're all about action here. Analytics ain't action. Go do action. So you can do a correlation analysis right now, even without this, on age and on, you could probably do it on age and team leader, but age and how far they live from work. What we found is half attrition rates when they were over 30 or over 40. Now, that doesn't mean I'm discriminating. I let the tool do its job, but I might go recruit in a place that isn't the observer, right? I might go recruit where I get more people over 30 because they leave me at half the rate. They know what they want. Similarly, if they were over 20 miles away, and it didn't mean I didn't hire anybody that was, an hour away. I have people that travel each way for 10 years, an hour and a half each way, but the likelihood of them staying with me if it was more than 20 miles or 20 minutes was low, and so we really started to narrow our search and our recruitment pattern and understand why they wanted to work with us if they were an hour away, because they might take the job, but in 2 months, they'd leave us if they got a better job that was 5 minutes away. So those are some things you can go do on your own even before you embark on the true deep analytics.
Absolutely, and actually there was a point that Mary had made earlier about closing the loop. So sourcing, right? How sourcing typically goes is we're putting a lot of postings really anywhere we can to try to get that funnel full so that we get enough applicants in seats. But the fact of the matter is you can optimize your sourcing, and I know NOVO has done a lot of work around thinking where do we want to be recruiting people, both in terms of location, but also what sources are producing the highest yields. And so if you can track in your systems whether someone came from a Craigslist or a Monster or a job fair or anything like that, you can then look and see how they performed on the job, whether they stayed a long time, and you can tweak those algorithms. So that's all about closing the loop and getting better and better at targeting the dollars you're spending on sourcing to get the very best applicant very best applicants into that funnel. So the study we did was, again, survival curves, Cox proportional hazard models. We actually have some separate work that we've done on performance, but in these cases we wanted to focus first on attrition and then expand it to performance. And so some of the insights here were really fascinating. These supervisors appear to have nearly twice the variance as trainers in terms of their effect on attrition. So in essence, the gap between the best and the worst supervisors is almost double what we see with trainers. So as soon as we saw this, we said, oh my God, this is amazing. We need to dig in a little bit more. We found that the best were 5 to 6 times better at training and retaining their employees than the worst. And we found that an employee supervisor is a stronger predictor of anyone's likelihood to quit than every other factor combined. And again, this came as somewhat of a surprise because it was so prominent, but in talking with people within the industry who have had a good or a bad boss, they said, no, this absolutely makes sense, that that resonated.
So one of the things we did here, besides, rethink, and we actually put in team leader profiles, right, to hire team leaders through this system. Because if it worked for reps, it's going to work for team leaders. That's one thing that we did. But secondarily, we put in 2 other programs. We put in a trust building workshop that there's about 20 scenarios that build or break trust. And that's the trust keeping. Trust is the #1 reason people leave supervisors. So for supervisors, there's 10 retention keeping skills, the #1 of which is trust building. And you can break trust and not even know you did it, and that's the worst trust breaking because you can't go back and apologize, right? And then the other thing is we started doing stay interviews. Instead of exit interviews, which are postmortems, we did stay interviews, which are basically when you come in, we do a handshake with them and say, if you ever think about leaving, or you know anybody that's thinking about leaving, you give us a shot at changing, because it's usually something, communication or a style, and if we can change it, we will. And people are almost in tears when you have this conversation. You care about me so much that you'd have this conversation with me. And we actually saved some people, even people that had been there forever that we thought were going to stay forever, some top performers. When we understood what the issue was, we could change it, we could fix it.
Yeah, and I would just add, so as the economist, I'm running the data and various models, and I don't actually get to see the ground level view of what's going on. And so I wish we could all travel back in time. Mary gave a session on building a culture of trust, and I sat in on that 2 days ago, and it was fascinating. It actually gave me a lot of visibility into what they were doing to enable their team leads to really promote success amongst the agents. So I thought it's really, this is the coupling of data and analytics with on-the-ground expertise and really understanding how to support people in order to allow them to do their jobs well. So in addition to some of the results we found around the team leads, we looked at transfers, and we found that transfers were actually associated with a lower likelihood of attrition. So
Probably because they got to a supervisor they trusted.
yeah, absolutely.
So-
I think it was a combination of a few things. Some of it is exposure to sort of different environments and so on and so forth. There's some literature that suggests that we tend to be engaged a little bit more when things are different as opposed to when they tend to be the same. But then also some of it is, likely them seeking out the right supervisor, or if there wasn't a good fit, NOVO doing their best to make sure that they could find an agent that did fit with the right team lead. And if you get that fit together, that's where, really great things can occur. And then separate from that, what we found was that rehires, this was a little surprising, but rehires actually had a 50% higher likelihood of attrition. Again, we thought maybe people who had already been in the job before were likely to stay because they knew what it entailed. But when we presented this to Mary, she made the comment that this was kind of like a marriage divorce thing. If it happened once, it seemed like it was a little bit more likely.
Well, this was a surprise to me, because we thought, gosh, we don't have to retrain them all over again. What a good thing, But the fact of the matter is, I don't know if they were using us to get back on unemployment or whatever, but it wasn't a good thing. And our people thought rehires were great. They were seeking them out. And it was like a 47% increase in attrition. And, it's not that we're not going to rehire someone, but boy, I want it to go all the way up the food chain to make a decision to rehire somebody at this point. It was shocking to me. That was, I think, of everything, because I know people leave supervisors, and that's why they leave. And so, best and worst supervisors didn't surprise me. It's the rehire that surprised me. Has anybody else had any experience like that? Similar?
Well, similar in so much that we looked at the relationship between tenure and CSAT scores. And it was eye-opening, because prior to doing the study, we were under the impression, well, the longer we keep them, the better they get at the job, the higher their CSAT scores come along. That's not true. At 18 months, they had plateaued.
They get bored, too.
And they had plateaued at 18 months, and then they consistently started to score lower.
Yeah.
So we combated that at 17 months, coaching them, bringing them back, and reorienting them to the values and expectations of the center.
Or keeping them forever might not be the goal if they can't maybe move up or move around, yeah.
Right, that's kind of what we saw.
Did you?
Is that transfers for us, what we went to a go-to-market initiative where we took, changed our sales and service model. People had to get assessed, and they got placed in these two positions.
Yeah.
So when that happened, some people, to avoid displacement, meaning, disposition from their job being laid off, they came back into a lower position that they originally started off at. It has not worked well for me and my students. And also, too, our plateau is probably around 2 years, because they feel at that point they think that they've mastered the job, so now it's time to move. They go and start sourcing out within the company to see if there's other things for them other positions for them, and they don't see them, so therefore they're shipwrecked. So they come back to me shipwrecked because they have not had an opportunity to promote.
Interesting.
So that's
There should be something about challenge.
Mm.
Otherwise, they've completed their challenge of this new job, and now they're plateauing at that level, and they basically don't have any more challenge. Okay, I've done this, it seems every day to me, and now they're coming to work just to go through the task.
Yeah. So goal setting is really important. that what you guys are talking about is lack of challenge and monotony. It's really important. That tells us something about how we need to lead differently.
Do we also look at markets, like, if you're we're in Atlanta, so there's call centers right down the street. So do we look at markets and how that can influence, hey, we just had a new call center open up down the street, they're hiring at 36 more an hour, that kind of thing. So does that kind of take that into consideration to the market area and all that?
Yeah, so in these models, generally what we include are a bunch of controls that try to get at all of those issues. So, it's hard to know within a week whether another call center opened up and potentially there are jobs there, but, it's controlling for the size of the eligible workforce, unemployment rates, wages, so on and so forth. So, we've tried to do as much of an apples to apples comparison with these analyses because what we want to say is the impact of trainers is this. It's not anything else. We've separated everything else. This is the impact. So
From an action standpoint, what we've done, we're in a pretty decent market within Salt Lake City. So Salt Lake City has a lot of people who are outpricing us a little bit. So as those organizations come up, what we'll do is we'll use this data as it comes across to say, you might be like us and you're building a huge funnel, but you can't touch everybody maybe as quickly as you want to from a recruiting and screening standpoint. So now we can prioritize and go after people quicker. So if it's us and somebody else, the relationship drives what happens from an attrition standpoint and even onboarding, in my belief and what I've seen, more so than even the wage, right? So if we're able to go after a green sooner and prioritize that, we have a better chance of bringing that person in.
Absolutely. I will tell you that the good people are gone in a week. So if you're building a funnel and you think, well, we'll get to them when we get to them, they're gone by then. They are gone. The good people are gone within a week. So we think the funnel is important. We're always pre-hiring before we need to hire. We know who's good and we take them out of the market. The other thing that we've noticed, or I've noticed in my 40 years, I hate to say I've been 40 years in this business, but the size of the center matters. The smaller the center, the more difference they think they make, the more they're connected to the company. When you start having centers of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, they get disconnected, and I do see attrition rates go up by center size. When I say pre-hire, I've pre-screened them, they're ready to go. Now, I may not hire them, but I'm ready to make an offer when I have a client come in and say, I need 70 or 100 people. So I may have pre-screened them, they've gone through the application process, I know they're green to go. I may not hire them, but I know, and so they may go by the wayside because I don't have any client right now. But when I do have a client and I need 70 or 100 or 200, I got them like that, and I have the good ones because they've been screened. But I probably won't have the ones that were green that are a month old. I'll have greens that are in within the week, but I don't know when I'm going to have that client say go, right? So there's a funnel built that's pre-screened. Is that how it works with you guys?
Yeah, we do this. So for example, we won't hang a sign outside the shop that says now hiring.
Right.
We'll say now interviewing. We're always interviewing. We may not always be hiring.
Right, right.
yeah, and just to add one more thing to Mary's point before we move on to Jeff, not only does size matter, but it's sort of organization and layout actually matters. So she had talked a little bit a couple of days ago about how they were using pods in which the supervisor, the team lead, was in the middle and all of the agents were around. We're actually doing research now looking at what we call co-location. So, and what we're finding is that when an agent sits next to a high-performing agent, that agent tends to do better. That we take cues from other people as to how we should be doing our job. And so we realize we can be doing a little bit better when we sit next to someone who's really got it. And so there are ways to optimize the layout, seating arrangements in order to get the very most out of your agent population. And again, it doesn't require paying them a couple dollars more. It's just a matter of putting them in the right configuration with the right team leads in place and so on and so forth. So, great. So we've heard from 2 outsourcers. And
Were you going to go to the impact?
What's that?
Were you going to go to the impact here?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So go ahead
So
before I
do you
move
want
on.
me to take that, or do you want to take it through?
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have jumped ahead. Go ahead, Mary. No,
Well,
this
I
is
was going to
your
take the
part.
impact. So the so what to all this, right?
Yeah.
So in the last month, Jack's my CMO back there, raise your hands. Jack has helped us hire, because we need a PR effort. We had to go get a lot of licensed agents. We're in open enrollment for healthcare right now. And they're hard to find, and everybody else is looking for them too. So we had to hire 1,000 people in the last month. And we did the same thing last year. And our supervisors, to get 1,000 people, you probably have to interview, when everybody looks gray and they all look blind and they all look alike, and you haven't gone through the pre-hiring interview that's online and the pre-selection and all the testing, you're interviewing 5,000 people for those 1,000 jobs probably. And that means the supervisor, we take them right away from their, we have recruiting people, but we want the supervisor to own the hire. So we're taking them away from their people, an hour interview, and that was ridiculous. So with this system, we have 30% of people self-select out. They can see a preview of the job, they can hear calls that are good, bad, and ugly. You could say, that job's not for me. They take a tour of my center online, and they go through all the pre-screening, and quite frankly, we just recently put in an English proficiency test, which was enlightening. In Dallas, and this is just frightening to me, this English proficiency was scheduled to be, I think Evolv put it in for offshore, right? And I said, I'm hearing a little bit of grammar problem, things I don't like, right? So, and we know that when a customer has a complaint, the worst thing you can do to them is have bad grammar. Bad loyalty scores when that happens. So we put this thing that was probably destined for the Philippines and India in our center, and of the applicants, and if anybody has heard me say this, don't raise your hands, but of the applicants that applied with high school degrees in the Dallas area, what % do you think were proficient in English? And I'm saying this is grammar, this is vocabulary, sentence structure, things like that. Percent? 75% proficient. Anybody else? 30% is the number. 30% proficient. All of a sudden, I have to open the funnel a lot wider to get the candidates I want. If I really, because I have high-end clients that demand a lot, and these are very sophisticated clients, and he doesn't work with them. So anyway, so what we did is, we want 70% of the time our supervisors are on the floor to be spent coaching with their reps. So here I am yanking them for the floor to do all this interviewing. So because the pre-screening is so good with hard skills, soft skills, value-based tests, interests, attitudes, and motivators, a voice audition, a job demonstration, because it's so good, we can have people do 15-minute interviews, and they're hiring 1 and 2 instead of 1 and 5. The amount of time that it takes away from the operation, so I can reinvest that time in supervisors and team leaders actually spending time with their people instead of people that are probably going to fail a test if we had given them a test. So that was one thing, is reinvesting the time and reallocating time where it needs to be with your existing people. And then we have had a lot of heavy ramps for healthcare, for seasonal business like roadside assistance, and for things like catalog sales at Christmas time. And we need to get 500 people like that. It's really tough if we didn't have a predictive hiring system where we had to pool people pre-screened and in, and just very efficient in terms of how we hire. And then you talked about the yielding, the insight that gave us better numbers and stopped us rehiring all these people over and over again. And it also changed how we spent money on recruiting and sourcing. And then yield, this is why I put it in, but this is not the biggest benefit to me. 17% reduction in turnover, but I'll tell you, getting a much higher quality candidate for my customers and having my customers happier was really the biggest result.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there are performance results that would accompany. We wanted to make sure this was short so that everyone could have an opportunity to speak. But you see the same reflected in those performance numbers: CSAT, AHT, hold time, QA, so on and so forth. Now I wanted to give Jeff the opportunity to speak. We've heard from a couple outsourcers, and so we thought it'd be an interesting perspective to talk to someone that was involved in the captive that had sort of benefited from the same analytics.
So we're kind of an interesting case because we are both captive. We have a 200-seat center here in Dallas, and we're also outsourced. So the bulk of our call center activity is actually supported by outsourcers like the folks here at the table. And what we have been trying to really do is find that right hiring and sourcing toolkit to be able to source all of our centers, not just here in Dallas, but we have nearshore sites as well as other domestic sites here in Texas. And what we have found by experimenting with a couple of tools, we don't use Evolv in our captive site, so that's an admission up front. We have not gone that far yet, but what we have the opportunity to do is really see how it compares to our standard in-house general hiring profiling tools, and how the call center specialized one works in both a domestic site and in one of our Latin Latin American sites. And what we have seen, because we're really hiring about 5 different skill profiles, so it's not a one agent fits all. We have a sales profile that differs from a service profile. We even have a service profile that's different for our highest value customers. That tend to be customers like Mary, and it's not because she's sitting next to me that she's highest value, but she shared with me earlier that she's a 13-year customer that never calls my call center.
You like me.
And we like Mary, but we do know that there may be a time where we're going to hear from somebody like that, and that customer service experience needs to be different than the one that might call me 3 or 4 times a month seeking payment assistance or trying to figure out how they can get their bill paid. So we're really hiring for a variety of profiles, high touch, customers that really want to have that full service experience versus some of the Gen X, Gen Y that are really looking for, fast and easy, get it done. If I have to call you because I've exhausted maybe the web opportunity or the chat opportunity, I want to get to an agent that's technically savvy that can get me through it and get it done. So we are hiring it's really 5 different skill profiles. And what we found by using these tools is that the partner you choose really matters. We've used a traditional general hiring profile in our own call center for a couple of years now, and it did help. So by going from the traditional model of supervisors do the screening, the profiling, and the hiring with a standard profile to an aided profile that's using technology, phone interviews, and some behavioral stuff, you are going to get improvements in agent retention. You're going to get an improvement in stickiness of the agent through the training class, so that in-class attrition is going to improve by using the tools. And then the kind of the survival curve that Michael talks about will get better with those tools. But if you can get to that green hiring profile, that an Evolv type tool helps you identify, you're going to see those at least double in our case. So we've seen that true in both a domestic center here in Texas as well as one of our Panama call centers, that hiring that right agent is going to save us both that cycle cost of having to source, the replacement cost of having to refill that class if it drops out during class, and most importantly, the cost of just ongoing attrition. In our model, like most companies that outsource, I don't technically pay for attrition. So my contracts allow me to go to a partner and say, attrition is on you. And that all sounds good to the finance folks, but in reality, that's not the way it works. And you're laughing because you know that's true too, because I pay for it one way or the other. It's either built into my rate if they have high attrition, or worse, it's built into my proficiency curves. And that's the one thing that we've seen with the tool in the site we've been using it the longest, is that the agents get better faster. So they come up the proficiency curve in about half the time. And that's in a sales center here in Texas, where agents sourced properly, who can work in a high pressure environment, who can sell well, and can be, dealing with a lot of rejection, are going to survive at a lot higher rate, but they're going to get better in half the time. So we sourced a group of 40 agents in a site here in Texas to take on a sales program. They were really the challenger in a champion challenger model. They'd been going up against, we brought them in to go up against an incumbent that had been providing sales support to us for about 3 years. And within 60 days, they were at parity in terms of close rate results, and within 90 days, they were the #1 provider. And when we went back and looked at it, it had a lot to do with the hiring profile that we had out of the gate. So the attrition rates were a fraction on the in-class attrition, and about 60% less on the survival curve, or 60% better on the survival curve. So getting the right toolkit definitely matters. And it's not just about, because a supervisor will tell you, I know what a good agent looks like, and I can find one. And you guys probably hear that too. The reality of it is there's a lot of things about a good agent that until you use these tools, you may not even know. It's as much about behaviors and how they view things, their philosophies on customer service or sales, that you have to get at. And that's sometimes tough to get out of an interview. So these tools do work. I can tell you from both the captive side, we saw an improvement in a non-Evolv situation, but more importantly on the outsource side, we saw it actually improve at about double the rate by using the right toolkit.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. So having heard all this and that, results that we presented, I'm sure everyone's wondering, well, how can I do this myself? And it's not as hard as it sounds. Big data can be a little bit intimidating, but you want to think big and you can start small. So one way to get started is to just identify a general area where you think improvement would hit your P&L. and to ask a very specific question of interest where you have some data that could yield some insight. So an example of this is not, how do I improve my attrition and performance? Again, those are just very broad questions. We want to ask, do rehires stay longer? Do they produce sort of better? What is the impact of trainers or supervisors on my attrition and my performance? These are much more specific questions, and if you have the data that comes to bear, you're going to be able to answer those questions and build off of quick wins. So next step is to gather the data from your systems. Again, we all have a variety of systems. There are issues sometimes in terms of integrating it, but there are a number of ways around that in order to get the data in one place, in one single flat file that you can then analyze. And then in terms of methods, I know we've thrown words around like survival curves and Cox proportional hazard models, but just getting started, correlations are going to give you very similar results, and they're going to show you whether you're on the right track. So just doing something very simple in, say, Excel is actually going to yield a lot of insight, and it's going to help you try to understand what the data is saying. Now, once you've done that, you want to build off of quick wins. So once we've answered a couple questions and we've seen that there is some insight there, we want to answer questions that are broader in scope and that have the potential to impact your P&L even more, and look at a broader set of data sources that could be used to answer those questions. So results, for example, a lot of the work we'll do with them comes from their HRMS and their performance management systems, but now they've learned how to supplement that with primary data collection. So they'll survey agents, they'll survey applicants. They're trying to understand and hear the voice of the agent in order to think about whether there are things they haven't necessarily considered that might actually have an impact on attrition and performance. And again, moving beyond those correlations, we can do things like regression, also in Excel, to control for outside factors, as was pointed out earlier, different effects that you see by location, by program, your market, geographic boundaries, so on and so forth. We want to control for those, and we want to produce very robust answers that yield an apples-to-apples comparison. And then finally, we want these insights to be actionable. And Dan and I had talked before about the fact that if this research is done and it sits on someone's bookshelf and it's a report gathering dust, it's not going to have an impact. It's almost as if it didn't occur in the first place. And so you've heard a couple examples from Dan and Mary and Jeff about how they've used that data to make changes and then to look back at the impact of those changes. And that's really this third principle, which is try to figure out what is the impact that these changes actually did have on your bottom line. Our findings is that if it's done well, you should generally see improvements that are 4 to 5 times the initial investment. So these are well worth it if they're carried out and there's actually changes that are made. And then once you've done that, you can sit back and say, does it make sense to build and scale this up so that we create a business intelligence program and or team to achieve even greater gains? And that's the point at which you want to think about, should we be hiring, should we be looking for a specific set of expertise, analysts, PhDs, what have you, that can bring more rigor and can be focused on doing this exclusively. So before I throw this out to the audience, I wanted to ask the panelists if they had any advice, any surprises as a result of the analytics that they had done, and just generally recommendations for those sitting in the audience as to how they can get started.
I'll go first because it's what we've been doing all day. So what I'd say is we've had this guiding philosophy. We have 5 guiding philosophies, but our first one is hire the best every time. We've said that for years. We started small, we dug into that a little bit, then we actioned on it, and just keeping it simple. It's very easy to get caught up in all this, and everybody says it, contact centers have a lot of data and maybe not all the intelligence in the world to go along with that data. So it's just about finding and starting small, and then it begins to snowball a little bit. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I don't think you have to go out and buy an expensive tool initially. You get started by getting your feet wet, as we did, just in understanding, some hypothesis you might have. You might have a hypothesis that turns out to be right, or it turns out to be wrong. And anyway, you're acting on what you think is right. You might as well confirm it from a data perspective. Then you're going in the right direction. I asked in my session earlier yesterday, what's the most important position in the call center? And I truly believe it's not the rep. It's the team leader. Team leader is influencing 15 to 20 reps, and they're influencing 400,000 customers a year. It's the team leader. And so, I think that our team leaders fought this at first because it took them off the floor, out of the process, but and so the whole process of predictive hiring assessment, we needed to change our processes in our company, and we forgot the change management aspect of it. And we went back to the ground once and we said we forgot the basic principle of change management. We were changing the role of supervisor and the role of the process. And I think that was pretty critical. But then we understood, when we started understanding team leaders, the worst to the best is 5 times the amount of attrition, or 6 times, we said, holy cow, we need to do a better job at hiring and selecting team leaders. And, you know, frequently people learn and they're trained in interview techniques. They start mirroring you. You hire people that look like you, right? And we found that that was certainly the case with team leaders. That's our next step, is to get very aggressive about who we hire. And the first thing to do is, you know, I'm going to put all our team leaders through this that are existing, and if they're red, they're red, and I'm not taking them out. I'm going to help them get better, and if I can't, I'll get them in a position that they're green. So I think that, you know, their ability to influence and bring down the attrition is much more than almost the predicted hiring system, right? Their ability to control the attrition by being a good boss. And that's my insight, I think.
Mine would be very similar to Mary's in that, you know, the supervisor really has to go through a mind change as you go down the path on this thing, because they've prided themselves on the ability to hire the right candidate. They'll also tell you in the same breath that they don't have time to coach their agents because they're always busy doing administrative things, which include hiring. So you've got to engage them early in this process and get them to trust the technology and to trust the process, because it's really not replacing them. It's augmenting what they can do. It's giving them a better pipeline of candidates so they can do the thing they do well, which is discern in the interview whether the candidate's just a good interviewer or you know, can really do the job. It's more about answering questions, because if you trust it enough, it's going to bring you the right kind of candidates. The supervisors are going to have a little bit of a hard time letting go. You also need to get your recruiters to think about their role a little bit differently too. So I think if you do embark on this thing, and if you want to get the full value out of it, and there is a huge ROI if you do this well, it's to make sure you don't overlook the way the supervisor's job has to change when it comes to hiring and the recruiters. So that would be my guidance.
Sure. Yeah, Jeff, I think that's a great point. I think people can sometimes be suspicious of data, and so we'll see reports and we'll say, you know what, this is not going to replace my gut intuition. And that is exactly right. This is not meant to replace recruiters. Really what this is sort of an enhancement. It's a way to make decisions based on what the data is saying, but again, not solely based on that. We take a lot of different data points into account when we're making that hiring decision, what the score was, whether they're a rehire, kind of what their aptitudes are. There's also that gut feel. So, you know, again, this is really meant to be a part of the holistic decision-making process.
Well, Michael, you showed us in our last quarterly business review the difference in survival rates or attrition rates among those that were marked green, good to hire. You know, after we do a behavioral job interview and all that, we still do that, but it's a 15-minute confirmation. You know, yellow, maybe, check these kinds of things because the data seems a little fuzzy. They answered this question this way and this way, you better explore that. Or red, and we did have a few reds slip through. We had a number of greens, maybe 20% green slip, or yellow slip through. And then we look at the survival curves. You know, showing that data to team leaders will make them say, I should trust the green over my own intuition.
Yeah. Great. So at this point, wanted to open it up. If there are any questions from the audience, you know, feel free to ask.
How do you select your team leaders? Do you hire in your call center? Do you hire out? Like, how do you choose those people?
You want to start?
Sure. We do a mix of both. We also are going to participate in this. It's called Coach, is the product we're going through, the pilot, if you will. So we're going to participate in that as well as put them into this predictive model and then look at the statistics. So today, you know, it's just like it is in everybody's call center, I think. A set of interview questions. Usually it's the next level manager and maybe your site director's involved, and they do some type of screening behaviorally.
So we have a management understudy program. If they're performing really well in off-season, instead of downsizing the staff, we might put them in a management understudy program with some structure. We are trying to get more structure than we've had. You know, if a supervisor has to go on vacation or is out on maternity leave, we'll take them from management understudy and put them in a temporary supervisor. Try them out on the job, and quite frankly, the best predictive hiring systems try people out on the job through job simulation. Job simulation has a 64% predictability with doing the job well or doing the job poorly. So there's nothing better than job simulation, actually having them do the job and try it out for a while, and you'll get feedback from your reps about, oh, can't wait till my supervisor's back, or she's great, she's wonderful. I mean, you at a certain point in your career, you get elected, not promoted, right? Elected by the masses, and you'll know. And so I think that, we hire a combination from the outside, because I just think bringing some fresh air and new ways of doing things is good. We probably hire 70% from the inside if we do a good job at this management understudy program.
Yeah, we're similar. We probably hire about 90% of our supervisors from promotion from within, but we put them through a couple of role changes before they get that shot. One would be basically a team coach that's embedded in the team. It's a partial production job where they actually are responsible for about 6 hours on the phone every day and about 2 hours of coaching and mentoring a small peer group. So we'll do that program, and that'll give them a feel for supervision and coaching and development, or at least the coaching and development side. And we'll find some that love that, and that's a nice way to move into a supervisor. Some will opt out because they realize it's really not the role they want. And then the other opportunity we give folks that are ready for a supervisory role is to, usually somebody who's very tenured, very knowledgeable, we'll put them into our nesting program and have them mentor agents as they come through nesting for about 2 or 3 weeks, and gives them a feel for what it's like to work with new folks that don't have the knowledge, demonstrate patience, but also impart knowledge is what we're looking for in a supervisor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Question for Jeff. Across the different facilities that you outsource to, how, it's a multiple part of the question, how involved are you in defining the hiring process your outsourcing?
Now, that's a great question, because if my lawyer was here, she would tell you that co-employment's a big thing to me, so I have to be careful about how I get engaged in the hiring process, especially in domestic call centers. So the way we've got the model set up is we jointly establish the hiring profile with the toolkit with our partner, and then it's tailored to the market they operated in, and then they administer all of that. We don't typically get involved in looking at candidates. We just look at the aggregate scores to make sure that they're adhering to the profile and let them hire within it. And then we'll come back and look at it at 3 or 4 months to see if they're kind of getting the results we're after. But we stay away from, we don't interview agents. We let them do it, but we prescribe the profile jointly with them.
So then how different is the process with companies, let's say, in Central America versus domestically?
A lot of similarities. There's a couple of extra steps in the Latin American call centers. So we'll put agents through an English proficiency battery before we'll bring them into the full behavioral interview. So we're going to do, a series of Versant type scoring on agents before we'll put them through the behavioral interviews. So there's that extra step, and then there's a couple extra background screenings. But generally, it's a pretty similar hiring process with those 2 exceptions, big exceptions.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
I had a question which was about how often you fine-tune the hiring model or the predictive analysis model.
I actually want
We did that. So I think we did it, and we were having a hard time hiring certain people. I think we were too aggressive or assertive in our standards at certain times of year where you have to hire a lot of people that are just licensed agents. So we tweaked that model. But I think it's, there are iterations coming all the time as we're feeding, and it's closed loop, the data back in. You're tweaking the questions. The best people are answering the questions this way. Oops, that's a good question. The right answer is yes. I mean, that kind of thing. And that gets tweaked all the time. We did have, and we've had Evolv in for 18 months, and I think we've had 2 major tweaks and iterations of getting it better. And then we track that before and after. We see, new survival curves that are even better.
Yeah, and I would just add that it's not necessarily a matter of timing as it is sort of statistically it's sample size. So we want to make sure that when we're making changes to the algorithm that we're doing that with a large enough sample size of agents that, we can say with a high level of certainty, okay, this question predicts, this question doesn't. We know answer A is much better than answer B. And so it's just a matter of waiting until enough people have passed through the platform to then look at the outcomes and say, okay, we feel pretty confident in these results, that sort of 95% level of confidence. Yep.
Quick question. I know this big data is around large centers. What are some of the suggestions that you have for those of us who manage small centers, less than 100, less than 50 centers? Because I know this wouldn't be cost effective for some of those centers that are so small. What are some of the suggestions you can pull from this tool or from your experience that can help us recruit and source and get a good agent?
There are some predictive hiring assessment systems that don't demand big data in terms of what they do is they have, so there are some SaaS-based systems that you can get. Be careful who you get because your partner matters, as Jeff said. But there are some that you can get that, you probably wouldn't qualify for their system, but that can handle 50 or 100. And they're online and they're very good and they're well tested. And I think it's worth investing in that, depending on your attrition. If you only have, 5% attrition, I'm not sure it's going to matter. But it's really more than attrition. It's about getting the right person, the right job, and performance. So I think they're out there. I think you start with some hypothesis about why people are leaving, and you run your own data modeling. And you can say, okay, I'm only going to hire within 20 miles. I'm going to try to recruit people over 30. That's where I started. But I think you can go beyond that because I think there are some systems out there for the smaller centers.
I would just add, I think that this idea of cultivating the pipeline, regardless of a tool or not, and the idea of getting your recruiters out doing that so that you're getting higher qualified candidates in for your team leaders to be interviewing, so it takes less cycle time to get the right hire. That's something you can do without a tool tomorrow.
Also, just a caveat on two things. You talked about it's pre-hire. So now, I'm talking about now that I've made some poor choices and I've hired and they're now a good fit. Do you recommend that some of the things that you pre-did to get good candidates so we can go back and do a post-screening?
Well, you could do that, or you actually have the performance data to say if they're good or bad, and you need to let your performance management system either take them out or get them in the right job. So frequently, they may be, you put them in sales, but they think sales is a dirty word. Well, if you can do, split the skill groups, sales and service, we'll get them in service if if you think they care about customers. I mean, I think the biggest thing you do, even with, 50 or 100, is do skill-based routing. Where you split service and sales for sure, maybe premium customers and not for sure. I think at 100, you're big enough to do a little bit of that. Jeff, what do you think?
That sounds about right. I think a lot of it depends on what problems you're looking to solve. I think most people enter into this thinking attrition reduction is my business case for one of these things, and that oftentimes can be, but I would encourage you to look at things beyond that. So it's how fast can you get an agent ready, especially in a sales culture, because every lead costs you something. And if you're missing the opportunity to convert at a much faster pace and you're really letting new hires weight you down, a lot of times the real business case isn't in attrition reduction, it's in getting them up the sales curve faster.
Yeah. One more data point I'd give you that you probably can do today. Most of you are probably doing typing tests of some sort. We do some data analysis with the Evolv typing test, and we know there's a break at 20 words per minute, a break at 35. It's different by market. In tech support versus sales is different. But it's something you can go look at your performance data, correlate that in a simple regression analysis in Excel and say, at what point should I not be hiring people from a typing score? What should I be wary of hiring them at because I know their performance data says it's from CSAT or HT?
Yeah, ours was at 30, so we did
30?
that too recently, and we saw a break at 30 that higher performers were typing at 30 or above and had less attrition.
Yep, in the back.
Yeah, so we've heard and we've seen some results of the impact of the system like this can have on attrition, but I've also heard mention that you can expect impacts, positive impacts on performance as well. Can you share a little bit about the variability that you see between top performers, presumably with a system like this, and those not having this?
Yeah, I'll just talk, we saw it across the board in quality, CSAT, first contact resolution, sales, but I'll tell you, in one program that has very, very long handle time, it's very complex, it's repaired, it's a emergency service auto roadside dispatch. We saw day one on the job, out of nesting, 200 seconds difference pre and post predictive hiring assessment.
I'd piggyback a little bit to answer your question as well. We've done one major revamp on the system, and that's just to tune it to attrition, because that's what we have the biggest ends or data set on. CSAT is something where you don't get as many surveys. So, only being 18 months, 19 months in, we haven't tuned to get the statistical significance there, but I'd say subjectively, we definitely see that. Offshore, onshore, we got, the majority of our sites are domestic, and we see the same type of increases that we will in the Philippines from a green hire versus a red hire for sure, in both HT and CSAT.
I think the other business case here is, if I had to go through the last month, I went through with 3 recruiters. If I had to do it, I'd need 10 recruiters plus team leaders off the phone doing it. I could put math to that. That was very enlightening and frightening. If anybody took the tool away, I don't know what I'd have to do. I'd have to go hire a bunch of people just to recruit.
And, yep.
How do you choose a vendor? What criteria do you look at?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question.
How do you choose a vendor? What criteria do you look at?
Oh, to evaluate our vendor performance?
No, I think how do you choose a predictive hiring assessment vendor? Is that what you meant?
Oh, okay. How do we choose the vendor? A lot of it is just, we had an opportunity because we outsourced to multiple providers to see what they were using. So I had a chance to really get a taste and look at their results before we chose the path we went down. Our HR team actually picked the tool we use internally, so we didn't have much of a chance to deviate from that. But what we have seen, and when you evaluate a provider, look for one that can provide credible references, and folks that, specific to call centers in particular, that can tell you that they're getting the results in call centers. Because in our case, what we saw was, the general hiring one, the behavioral interviewing tool that's used for analysts, managers, supervisors, and call center folks, tends to average around some things and not necessarily give you the right skill set. The call center job is different to hire, and a company like Evolv that specializes in that and really only works in call centers can give you a leg up in that process. But ask for proven results, ask for referenceable clients that can tell you that the results they're getting that are willing to share.
I get a call center specific one if you can, because they really know the call centers. They know the problems inherent in call centers. And I think most importantly, get one, and you may find Evolv's the only one that does closed loop, and that was most important to us, is to get the closed loop where we're putting the performance management system in and saying, where did we hire them from, and what intelligence can we do to go act, because it wasn't just about attrition. And so I think the number one thing I'd be looking for, besides closed loop capabilities, is get a partner that can help you solve problems. If you don't have a partnership, because it's not just about attrition, what problems do you have? I love to throw bizarre things at them and say, well, what about that? Well, they say, that's interesting. We'll come back to you, And I love challenging them. And so I think someone that loves challenge and loves analytics and is engaged as a partner to help you solve the problem was important for me.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's all I was going to say. Is, we did an informal RFP, if you will. We could do a stack rank, just like if you're going to buy TCS or IEX or, EWFM nowadays, I guess. Same thing here, but really it's the partnership piece, just like it would be with those. It's almost, at some point, these will become a commodity, right? The difference between a provider and Evolv someday, maybe today there's significance there, right? But maybe not 5 years from now, so the partnership is key for us.
Great. Great. Well, I want to thank our panelists for participating. This is a great discussion. Thanks to everyone for attending.
Let's go ahead and draw if we can.
Oh, yeah.
Jack, can you grab it? We're going to draw for the books.
You gonna autograph it?
I can autograph it if you want to.
Autograph.
Actually, I had Showtime once ask me for 100 books for their giveaway, and I said, well, if you want to buy it through me, I'll autograph it for you. They said, we don't know how to tell you, but we don't care. So that's last time I ever offered an autograph.
Mary Murcott. No, it's Mary Carter.
Okay, Mary Carter, all right. Yay. Next.
And Jeff, will you draw the next
I
one,
will.
please?
Go for a business card here. If I can get it.
And I'll let you call it out.
Behind you.
Paul Roberts.
Paul, all right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks to everyone.